What rough beast its hour come round at last, slouches towards Bethlehem to be born?
Je dis ce que je pense et je vis comme je veux. Je gagne beaucoup d'argent, mais quand j'en avais peu, je n'étais pas plus malheureux.
We've got people here, so yeah. I feel like, remember when Marco Rubio passed Trump the thing saying, like, go back to whatever the other oil...
Chevron.
Yeah, Chevron, exactly.
It's like...
Right, this sort of backstage thing. So go back to Chevron, PSYOPs, and let's tell people what we are going to be talking about.
All righty. So given that there's so much going on, today basically we're going to be covering... of course, we're starting with the murder that should have been completely impossible to misread and yet somehow was. The death of Renee Good in Minneapolis has produced not one public narrative, but two seemingly mutually exclusive realities, each insisting that it is simply describing the facts. And the fracture is not just about our media bubbles that we're enmeshed in, it's about how power and identity and fear can actually fracture empirical reality and shape what counts as real in the first place. And from there, we're going to move into a deeper question, which is, what does a pluralist society like the one that we supposedly live in owe to those people who can't psychologically tolerate plurality? And there are a lot of political theorists in the past, including Karl Popper and John Rawls, and to some degree, Erich Fromm, who wrestled with this and what Karl Popper calls the paradox of tolerance. And that is how a just society should normally tolerate even intolerant doctrines, and yet must be willing to defend its basic liberties when a movement tries to shut down the very space for disagreement, which is what we're seeing right now. And we're also going to kind of go back and forth about the way that every society seems to contain a minority that craves certainty and hierarchy and a simple story that has clear enemies in it. And this isn't because they're uniquely evil, but ambiguity is temperamentally unbearable for some people. And narcissistic political projects know how to recruit and exploit this vulnerability. And part of that is by offering this totalizing narrative that explains everything and licenses aggression up to and including mass atrocities. And finally, we're going to kind of like, if we have time, go through and talk about narcissistic collapse and how the regime, because it is a narcissistic system, might be exhibiting some signs of that collapse because the myth of its grandiosity is starting to run into empirical reality and be punctured by that reality. So, Virginia, I wanted to maybe kick off with a question that when you look at the murder of Renee Good, what do you see first? Do you see an individual tragedy or evidence that we no longer share a common reality at all?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, the video, I think, left doubts in very few minds about what exactly happened. The doubts had to be kindled very deliberately by J.D. Vance, by Kristi Noem, by Donald Trump. So that was a process that I sort of recognize from the Rodney King beating, right? Which is like, you see this thing, and a lot of people have been quoting 1984. You see the evidence of your eyes, the evidence of your ears in the video. Just something that looks like an affront to decency, looks like an instance of cruelty, looks like the kind of thing that, and Richard Rorty is big on sentimental fiction. He's big on the sentimental topoi, the kind of thing that Dr. King set out to create for people. So like the clear beating of an innocent person who's not fighting back is a spectacle for the camera that is meant to inspire, to stir cortisol, to stir, say, oxytocin or the desire to care, and all the things actually that Nietzsche said are terrible in people, the desire to care for people who are suffering. So I think this had the video and also the first accounts, because it was so clearly someone shot in the face. People kept mentioning that she was a mother shot in the face, right? So they have a big thing on their hand. Anyone trying to extenuate this, anyone trying to kindle doubt that there was anything but a woman driving away shot in the face, really had a lot of work to do, which is, I think, why J.D. Vance sounded so confused, it sounded like propaganda. There was too much language. One thing that sentimental fiction does that's really elegant is foreclose doubt that an innocent person has died. It's like Dickens was great at this. The Rodney King video was great at this. But then you have, to bring it back to Rodney King, then you have a set of defense attorneys for the police, highly paid defense attorneys, that try to introduce nuance into something that is not nuanced, and try to introduce professional codes that make no sense, but that play to everyone's idea that they're an intellectual, everyone's idea that they should be reading beyond that first gut punch that says this is wrong, right? Like, Kristi Noem killed her own dog. She shot her own dog. She shot her own dog for what she cited were complicated reasons. Like, the dog was dangerous. Like, she had to tell a big backstory about why she shot him. But then she claims for herself a certain expertise about canine behavior and all these other things. And to accept the obvious cruelty and inhumanity of her gesture, you have to accept all this complicated language. The same is true for the attack on Venezuela. The first thing that anyone says, you don't have to know anything about international laws. Like, whoa, you went into another country. We're not allowed to go into other people's houses. You went into another country and kidnapped the head of state. That's just wrong. That's wrong to a child. You beat up Rodney King, that's wrong to a child. You shot a woman in the head, that's wrong to a child. So now the burden falls on the powers that be to explain something, to make counterintuitive arguments that make us doubt ourselves, and also introduce this whole thing of reading videos, reading them against themselves. We're accustomed now to AI, so we know that, like, we can be tricked, that the evidence of our eyes is not in this case. No one I know, at least who's talking about it, saw her shot. So we really are just talking about reading the video. So the evidence of our eyes is a kind of literary critical or art critical reaction to a spectacle that's like framed for us. And then you can watch all the videos. So I'm not totally sure that this was a Yanni Laurel problem or the dress that's gold or blue, the dress that broke the internet, where everybody is looking at the same object, a Rorschach, and reading it differently. I think there is a concerted effort to muddle our minds about something that is otherwise obvious. So, arguments that the victim had it coming in this case, they're not landing with our intuition. They might be landing to our intelligence or our desire for conspiracy theories or other parts of ourselves that are engaged in this. But truthfully, and I don't know if it's just my feed, I don't see people making the argument that J.D. Vance has made. I know that argument is being made, but I also know that already going into this, 52% of Americans thought that ICE had overreacted before the murder. And I don't see that number coming down, right? But it is a concerted effort to tell us that this thing is different than it would appear, as I say, to a child. So that's a long answer, but I'm not totally sure that the reality is fracturing along 50-50 lines. I think that if they've done the right thing, like the defense attorneys for the police, in the Rodney King trial, they've introduced confusion about something that isn't confusing. I see some people I really admire, like Jamelle Bouie, saying, I refuse to engage with this as a controversy. It's like the mainstream media that's lost the plot a long time ago is saying about the Maduro kidnapping and saying about the video that this is further evidence of divisions in America, that we all see it differently. It's complex. It's a Rashomon problem. Maybe Maduro did need to be removed. And maybe this is a time where we should be applauding Donald Trump and not just suddenly, thinking that he's evil no matter what he does. I've heard Nicholas Kristof, I've heard other people actually make that argument with a straight face. In this case, there are people, including CBS News and other now state media, trying to both sides the video. But right now, I don't think Americans are buying it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think that the role of motivated reasoning is what really comes into that. This is why it's not like the Yanni Laurel or the blue white dress problem, because no one came to Yanni Laurel with a conviction that it already said Yanni,
Yes, and that's right. That's right. They weren't heavily motivated.
Right. And so the motivated reasoning where people already entered this text, right? And if we see these videos as a text and taking Venezuela and all of the other issues to the side for the moment, because there is more nuance in some of those issues, even though I still agree that we should not be doing what we're doing at all. But with the Renee Good killing, if the series of videos is a text and people enter that text with a lot of motivated reasoning, which is to see anything affiliated with the regime as being justified and anything affiliated with the other as unjustified, then they've already essentially made up their mind about the meaning of that text. And I think that is what we're seeing, where the evidence of people coming online and saying, fuck around and find out, et cetera, about this is more about defending where they already see their identity marker as being planted in the sand, and not so much about interpreting anything. And that is the moment where I think a lot of people have woken up from January 7th to January 8th and said, wow, there is really no point at which a sizable minority of the population of this country is going to come back from this, is going to say anything is too much. Right. And I think that is what is scaring a lot of folks. And that is also what is making a lot of folks say, now is the time where we are going to cut this off and say, we are, something really drastic needs to be done, because we recognize that there is absolutely nothing that will stop this bulldozer if we are simply allowed to let it run.
Yes. I have been thinking a lot about adrenaline lately, because I think I don't know about you. I actually don't think we've ever talked about this, but I'm like very slow to anger these days, almost slower to anger than ever. And I think there's a level of burnout. We've had a decade of this, and I can't even find the rage and fear of 10 years ago of the Women's March right now. It's just unavailable to me. I do think that there is if this represents a bridge too far for sort of the anti-fascist side, and I use that in the context right now of Italy, which I've been thinking a lot about. So there a side where anti-fascist was not self-styling for media or getting you in the line of fire. It was just like, are you pro-fascist or anti-fascist? So let's just think of it in those contexts. For anti-fascists among us, this could be a correction to burnout. I really started to see anger, even in people who think that the left and even liberals in the Democratic Party have Trump derangement syndrome, or thinking like we need to just wait this one out. I saw recently some historians on Blue Sky, really, male white historians who are at Ivy League universities, saying, you know who we should have listened to? We should have listened to critical race theory, and we should have listened to gender studies. And it is, remarkably true that the people at Gamergate, or the people at, Ibram Kendi, or were simply the Cassandras. They were just telling the truth. Gamergate is before the election of Donald Trump. If you were paying attention to that, it turns out not to have been a fringy opinion. It turns out that the people who were in the line of fire, the people who are in the sights of the regime, even when Obama was president, who were getting trolled all the time, they knew that this was there. And by the way, they are burned out. They are really burned out. So we're late to the rage that they and some of the rest of us were experiencing 10 years ago, but better late than never. I don't know if you saw the this Episcopal priest in New Hampshire. So my church in my home state saying, get your wills ready. We're going to be putting our bodies on the line. The Episcopal Church is known as like the George Bush family church. It's the WASPy Anglican church.
Oh, believe me, my great granddaddy was the Episcopal Bishop of North Carolina. So
oh my gosh, right. So somehow, right, that these are not people that would have done #the resistance even a short time ago. These are people who, when I went to church the day after Trump was elected the first time, we had to pray for Trump, our president-elect, and Mike, our incoming vice president-elect, right? Everyone does by Christian names, first names, and they got caught in my throat. But we were supposed to pray for them, like Obama said. We wanted to set them up for success. So we hoped that they were to support them. And now the very same people, meaning the leadership of the Episcopal Church, is saying, get your wills ready. It's time to put our bodies on the line. So ideally, something has spiked adrenaline in you could see the Black Panthers on video standing with their guns like this, that they're licensed to carry. Very, very menacing. They're identifying as Black Panthers. Who knows for sure what their affiliation is in Philadelphia? These are extraordinary videos. And, woe betide to the supporters of ICE who have not looked at some of the rage circulating in social media. Empowered rage. People with guns.
Absolutely. And I do think, and I saw a message too from the Archdiocese of Catholic priests as well. It was not quite as poignant or pointed, excuse me, as the Episcopal bishop, but it was very similar. And so I do think we're starting to see almost and if I, could even make this, metaphorical jump to a autoimmune response, which is, and this gets back to, again, the paradox of tolerance, where, we have for so long lived in, I grew up, it was all about multiculturalism and political correctness and all of these, hands across America and Band-Aid and feed the world and, Free Willy. And it felt like this, it was a time where we were hiding our imperialism behind all of these totalizing and leveling narratives. And I think that in itself was able to hide a lot of the anti-democratic, anti-pluralistic, and driving a lot of that backlash groups to underground, where they have been, that rhetoric and all of the desired policies that they wanted to put into place to push all of that out of the way were able to really ferment in the underground. And then are now that is part of the coalition that they've been able to build. And I think it's the really unifying part of that coalition is that they are actively against plurality and ultimately democracy. And that is what you even saw in the recent Manhattan Institute survey of the GOP, which was fascinating, where they divided the GOP into what they called core GOP, core Republicans, who are people who are reliably conservative over a long period of time and have voted Republican for a long time. And then the new entrants, which are people who have come in recently. They're mostly younger and they were activated by Trump. And what they saw in the differential between those two groups was that the new folks are actually what they called not reliably conservative. They're something else. Right. So they 15% of them list themselves as openly racist. About a similar percentage list themselves as openly anti-Semitic. And so we're starting to see this, what I think is a lot of these underground narratives that were bubbling up in the white evangelical Christian nationalist movement. They were bubbling up in the gamer, male supremacy areas and, in other areas. And so we're starting to see that come to the surface and create this, the regime's narrative, which is all of those things, the anti-vaxxer, health is only what comes from the earth and, modern medicine is evil. That's what this coalition is about. It's about a shared list of people you want to eradicate. It's not about any set of values or policies.
Yes. I keep thinking about when we're trying to determine what's lost. So I think one of the interesting things of looking back to the Hands Across America period, or the period where wokeism was really a widely shared aesthetic, it is really interesting. One of the things that I always think about during the pandemic is that Jack Dorsey, who was then running Twitter before Musk took it over, gave $1 billion away of his money. And I went to look and see where he gave it. This is 2020, so it's 5 years ago, before the rise of the tech right, but after, Trump's presidency and Black Lives Matters in the news, right? And you think that this conservative strain has just been there all along, or that, it's hard to remember a time when everyone wasn't in the thrall of the anti-woke fad, that he gave it to Black girls who code, and he gave it to rebuild Black communities. And it was the way that Mackenzie Scott gives her money to, historically Black colleges and universities now. And it was online with the democratic impulse. And, I have had to admit to myself that some people were kind of natively anti-woke, and we can talk about why that's true. But it seemed bewildering that people did not see things like getting more Black girls involved in coding as just increasing enfranchisement, as an extension of the democratic project. Now trans people are included. We used to have a time when it was white landowners, and now they're, one by one, the story of the 20th century was increasing enfranchisement and increasing welcoming of people who'd been excluded from the pie. And it's hard to remember what a short time ago this seemed inoffensive to people. But clearly, there was a counter narrative, as you point out, an openly anti-democratic narrative that was like opposed to multiracial liberal democracy, which had held both parties and, essentially all Americans, except for a quarantined group of Klansmen, it was a final vocabulary, as Rorty would say, for almost all of us. And certainly you weren't allowed to speak against it in polite company. I mean, I guess you might run into someone who said we'd be better off with a benevolent dictator or a monarch, or obviously these microaggressions that were still being discussed in 2020 as a real problem. And very, very quickly, that's been overturned in in a paradigm shift that has the velocity of an actual revolution. We think of paradigm shifts, we think of memes evolving basically like at the pace of a life cycle. We don't see people as suddenly, or we don't regularly see people as suddenly in the grips of an anti-democratic impulse in America. I don't think we've seen that on this scale ever.
It is interesting because I think in a way, you're right that it's almost like the snowball picked up enough momentum and became large enough and public enough that we can see that as like cresting into the public view and suddenly becoming a major issue that we have to deal with around 2016, or maybe a little bit previous to that with the Tea Party movement. But when you look at the evolution of the underground power structure, the parallel power structure, parallel institutions, most of it was begun as early as the 1960s, 1950s, because it came out of the evangelical far-right Christian movement. And I think it was at the point where those groups decided, once the Klan kind of fell out of favor after the 1920s, 1930s, and then you had the anti-fascist sentiment after World War II, a lot of that stuff went underground and came back up though inside of evangelical Christianity, and that they had a process and an entire playbook, that they were going to do exactly what you see in Project 2025. Project 2025 is only the 2025 version of the Mandate for Leadership, which has been a report that the Heritage Foundation has put out for decades.
Yeah.
So they're just updating it every year. And so I think that's important that we see that, again, because these folks were able to gain as much power as they were, because people ignored them for so long, because they're cranks and wingnuts, that is how they were able to move into the area that we see them in now, where they've got their fingers in every single pie. This is the Seven Mountains Mandate of evangelical Christianity in the Reconstructionist, I think, is the subsection of that, where they see, the seven mountains are the seven areas of public life, and they want to see Christians dominate each and every one. They've been working at this for, half a century.
And what are the seven? What are the seven?
I actually can't name them off the top of my head, but they include education, public media, finance, and private life. So basically everything where you see like culture wars stuff, where you see this is why Sinclair Media took over all of the rural newspapers and radio stations. They are trying to, and of course, all of the school boards, they're trying to infiltrate all of these things at the ground level. Right. In order to dominate the narrative, to dominate the policy at the ground level, and then eventually work toward the top. And that is what they have been able to do. I do think they've unlocked something, that a Pandora's box, that they can't put this stuff back in. And I think it's going to take their whole movement down. And there are even people within that movement who have been saying we've been selling this narrative of persecution, Christian persecution, for so long. And we might have actually unleashed that on ourselves by being so intolerant. And because I think that is what you're going to start seeing, right? I'm already seeing that on my social media feed. I saw somebody who is in China, who is Chinese, but who is posting, to Americans saying, take note now of who has an American flag outside of their house and start making a registry. And you can take the resources of those people, which is not the answer.
Right.
Let me be really clear.
Yes.
But this is what people when the pendulum swings back. If people don't have forbearance toward the very people who are causing them such pain and such anxiety now and who are committing true atrocities, you could very easily see, I mean, the French Revolution, people are already invoking, but how did that end? Reign of terror
Right.
followed by an emperor.
Right. Right. And then in the birth of the conservatism we see now that the Edmund Burke idea that sort of reigned supreme and also followed Stalinism, that left-wing revolutions are just chaos, more chaos, and they always end in a bloodbath and violence.
And that's, that's not true, because it's not about the valence of the revolution. It's about the totalizing narrative behind that, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
And it has nothing to do with the political valence at all.
But what is very interesting is it is extremely difficult to fight fascism with democracy, in the sense that democracy is slow and procedural and boring, and you have to like consensus, and it happens not by violence. And there are a lot of also videos that appeal to the white lefties and my male lefties in my life, like kind of glorifying John Brown now, including Black activists, like developing a new interest in like white men who kill white slave owners, right? So you guys are armed, like get out there and do this, like start killing white people. And I absolutely respect the adrenaline, but it's the same anti-democratic impulse, obviously. It's a terrorist impulse. It's an impulse people have when they feel cornered. And I think a lot of people feel cornered who
it's the impulse to righteous violence.
Violence, exactly.
I think that is honestly, and this gets into this whole like horrible irony of the present moment, because what it's easy to overlook, and I find myself having to have a lot of patience and step back from this right now, because I also feel a lot of rage and just grief.
Yes.
But we have to understand that for the people who are sympathetic towards this regime, they have been living in a continual state of fear and anxiety on the level that we are right now for the last 20 years.
That's right.
The fact that was fictional, it doesn't make their lived experience any less real. And so they have flipped into a feeling of security, a feeling of vindication. But again, that righteous violence is what they had, the desire for righteous violence is what they had built up because of these years of being indoctrinated to think that they were constantly under threat and going to be eliminated and annihilated.
Yes.
And now if we, who are actually living under the threat of annihilation, give into that impulse in return, it will produce the same eventuality that we're seeing.
So I've written on Substack about this, but I've become really interested in the war diaries of sort of ordinary citizens, in particular, this woman, Iris Origo, who wrote about her experience, wrote a war diary about her when she was in Italy during the rise of fascism and then during the war. So she is chronicling mostly the experience of all of us, which is so sitting in our houses, during the pandemic, I was able to see in Brooklyn some giant trucks with dead bodies being fed into them because it was such a hot spot in Brooklyn. But right now, ICE is not in New York City, and none of this am I seeing either out my window or on the street. So mostly what we're being treated to is this cacophony, as Iris Origo says, that she also experienced during the rise of fascism, which comes from, in her case, listening to the radio and reading the newspapers, where she was toggling among polyglot. She was listening to anti-fascist radio out of England and France, and she was listening to pro-fascist radio out of Italy and Germany, and trying to piece things together because the internal factions were also trying to get samizdat information to her in Italy about what was happening. And one of the reasons that you're reading the news right now is not just doom scrolling. It's the same reason Iris Origo was listening to the radio and plowing through what she said regularly put her at the brink of insanity. She said the worst noise of the war was not the bombing or the shells, but the cacophony on the radio. Was plowing through propaganda, one speech after another that you had to listen to by Mussolini, by Hitler, by Neville Chamberlain, and try to figure out what was going on. Right now, we really are looking to the news for something new, and that is, what the fuck should I do right now? Which is what I looked to the news for during the pandemic, but in general, I don't look to the news for. And I'm not very interested in op-eds now. I'm really interested in like what little pieces of things can I take away, because ICE is in Minneapolis. New York has been in the sights of the administration for a long time. You're in New Orleans. We're waiting on tenterhooks to figure out when are they coming here, and do I go out in the street and protest, or are protesters now fair game? What about my kids who often, jump to protest? And also, making exit plans for, when JD Vance is now saying they're going to knock on doors. It does
They
seem
are
like
already doing that in Minnesota.
Okay.
They
They're
are breaking down
right.
people's doors.
And Trump has said that anyone who opposes him is also fair game for some kind of deportation, no matter whether you were born here or not. So, you and I write regularly against the regime. Lots of listeners also do. And, they're checking our social media feeds. And we need to, right, there's certain kinds of, you and I are both David Graeber fans, but there's certain kinds already of hedges on our autonomy. My son's girlfriend is here on a student visa. She's long not attended pro-Palestine protests for exactly this reason of deportation. And can't leave the country for fear she won't get back and finish her education. And these are actual decisions about our autonomy, like, can we leave? Where should we leave? How quickly can we get out? What the threats are to the city, and then up to and including like Jerome Powell is being court-martialed or whatever. Like, if they are taking over the finance system, are we facing some kind of world of hyperinflation? All these things really have consequences for us, not to mention simple curiosity about the world. Have we annexed, or, are we occupying? Is Trump now the president of Venezuela? Like these are like, and is he going to annex Greenland? And are we losing NATO? Have we already lost NATO? Is NATO amassing their own weapons? Like, can we anticipate a world war? I mean, all these things are active possibilities. And Orisa Rigo in 1939, it's not like there weren't people around her, including people in high positions of power, who said, like, keep it together. It's like, let's not exaggerate. The fascists are this like group of young boys getting their, they're essentially the Proud Boys of our time, and they're still not going anywhere. There was like a foreign minister who said, like, war will be averted. We got this, right? Neville Chamberlain obviously saying that. So the fact that we have voices around us who seem more sophisticated, more chill, they're like staging for us, like, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. Like, you guys you're just talking like those, you're talking like Gamergate girls of 10 years ago, shrieking and, like,
Shrill.
Oh, all of you on Shrill, of course, all of you on Blue Sky, just in a liberal echo chamber. That, too, was the argument made to Orisa Rigo all the time. She doesn't know if war is coming. And she writes in her diary, maybe it won't happen. It seems like there's a lull. It seems like people have gone back to business. Italy will never align with Germany because everyone I know dislikes Germany. And, the fact that they're barreling like a Greek tragedy toward, this terrible, terrible war, all these casualties. At some point, she's like, 1 million boys have been called up in Italy, but it seems like it's going to stop there, and that's like a source of relief. So I think we're doing a lot of that right now, of saying like, well, Zoran in New York, we're saying Zoran Mamdani had that good meeting with Trump, and Trump swore he wouldn't send anyone to New York, so I can sleep tonight. And we might be deceiving ourselves. One other thing she says is, it's the deceit, the propaganda as piped into our heads by people we know, right? Like shades of the propaganda, which is like, well, the cop felt genuinely threatened, or, the protesters had been shouting in his face or whatever. So, or he had this other trauma from another, anyone extenuating what happened there has swallowed a certain amount of propaganda. So anyway, Orisa Rigo is hearing this from all sides. We are hearing this from all sides. Information space is obviously cracked almost beyond recognition. And I think, we might get to keeping our sanity as an actual task. This is what like early mentions of self-care, and I mean in the Black community, organizing community, meant. They didn't mean scented candles, right? They meant just like, don't go insane. Just don't go insane right now. And trust your instincts when you know this is wrong. Trust your instincts if one of your thoughts is like, my son's going to be called up, right? Like, there were people who opposed the Iraq war entirely on the grounds that they didn't want their kids to have to fight a war. That is a legitimate way to go. Stop at the sentiment. Don't don't overthink this, because then you find yourself having to defend liberal democracy, and liberal democracy does not really admit of a strenuous defense.
Well, I think it does admit of a strenuous defense, but it's not in the context that, again, because it doesn't invoke righteous violence. And I think that's
Right.
it actually protects a sense of contentment and normalcy and quotidian sights
Right.
and sounds and smells and the comforts of home that aren't invested with this moralized religiosity that the white homeland narratives, or the, Nazi propaganda about the women, like all of the artwork, it's supposed to be glorifying.
Yes. Yes, that's right. And also the recruitment ads for ICE that partake of the same thing with just
right. They're the Norman Rockwell version, but it's racialized and imbued with this idea of hegemony.
Well, I just was gonna say, it's also interesting to talk about the desire for lefty violence, for righteous violence on the left, because, first hearing an Episcopal bishop say, "Get your wills ready. It's time to put our bodies on the line." He may be thinking of Dr. King style passive resistance, of absorbing blows, right? The Black Panthers are carrying their own guns out. There are even kind of middle-aged white women like myself who've switched from doing analysis of what's going on to going to gun ranges. This is another TikTok phenomenon, and learning how to use guns, right? And while I get that, because it is important to keep our blood up, I would ask, I guess, that people focus on, if they're going to lean into any kind of effort to stir themselves, that they think less about putting a bullet in the brain of Jonathan Ross and more about care. So I think part of the reason that, say, Graydon Carter, he's the person I'm thinking of, who decided to turn Vanity Fair, uniquely the magazine in New York, against the war, right? Why did he do it? Entirely because he would picture his child dying in the war, right? Not because Iraq wasn't important for our interest, or because, he was too old to go to war, and he just thought about his son getting drafted. And that was enough to make him take steps to oppose the war from the point of view of writing on it, right? There is something you can do with your righteous anger, and that thing is care. It's not clear that John Brown accomplished more than the people on the Underground Railroad who were giving
and
shelter.
That's the point I wanted to, kind of the corollary I wanted to make is, the righteous violence is all, the impulse to it is incredibly human, but it doesn't lend itself to strategy very well.
That's right.
And it doesn't lend itself to a long, drawn out marathon of resistance. That is the issue where it sort of starts to break down. And I think, to go back to your earlier point about, all of these different theaters on which the regime is, making incursions, they are overextending themselves.
That's right.
120,000%.
Yes.
There is absolutely
as Trump would say about
no way.
Yes.
There is no way that they have the capability to actually maintain all of these different theaters, because they're not thinking that way. They don't think strategically. They think in terms of aesthetics, and they think in terms of spectacle.
Yeah.
And the more they can rile people up, the more they can destabilize everything, the better they think that they're going to be able to control the narratives.
That's right.
It's not even about any actual policy results in the long term.
Yep.
Russ Vought is thinking that way, so he's the one to worry about there. But most of them are not thinking that way. And so they have opened up all of these different Pandora's boxes in all of these different areas. And there is not a computer or an AI on this world that could effectively predict all of the interactions of the things that they have unleashed. And they continue to make it worse.
Yeah.
There is no way to predict the way this is going to go.
That's right.
And it could be that we see a world war easily. It could be.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean, yes.
In which we're the bad guys. We've been the bad guys for a long time, let's be honest. But in which we are the unequivocal bad guys and the aggressor. It could also be that we are the world's biggest debtor.
Yes.
Straight up. And this is us literally going around shoving our AKs in the air and saying, look at me, I'm the strongest. Meanwhile, all those AKs are paid for by China.
Yes.
All it would take for our allies to do is stop
Yeah.
showing up to our bond auctions.
Right.
Do
Amazing.
not buy our government debt.
Do not buy our government debt. Yeah. And then also, put the dollar in free fall and God only knows what. I mean,
And
but
that is also
that's
what the
another
Venezuela
front. That's
thing is
another
about.
front. That's another theater. Are the, that you've written well about is AI and currency markets. And the reason that some of these conversations spiral is not just because, you and I love a tangent. It's
Yeah.
because there are so many theaters, as you put it. And jump easily from, are they going to come to New York, to, what am I going to do
The
about
micro
student
to the
visas?
macro.
From the micro to the macro. Exactly. Because you want to think ahead. So let's get into a little bit of thinking ahead. It's also interesting to watch. Iris Origo said that I almost want to show it to people, that the newspapers sometime in the late, I think in the early summer, late spring of 1939 ran like a puzzle, like a kind of Wordle thing. And it had the names of 5 world leaders. I think there's Mussolini, Hitler, or something, right? Hitler. Yes. And they're lined up in this way. And it says, who's going to win the war in Italian? And I put this on Blue Sky, actually. And they're lined up such that you can make out that Stalin is an acrostic down all these different names of who's going to win the war, right? So there's lots of predictions like that. I tried to make my own with NATO, Trump, this, to say Putin, because it's really hard to do an acrostic with Xi, XI, things that I spent a lot of time doing this morning because they're not other names that have X and you only get 2 names. Anyway, but the idea that people are doing gamified prediction markets, even in Italy in 1939, and the idea that the vilification of England, especially in Italy, follows the lines that they are politically correct or woke or whatever. It looks so much like they call the countries that they oppose the democracies. So this is a time when nothing is loaded, and America and the allies haven't won the in World War II. So it's a viable question of who's the bad guys here? The fascists by that name, or democracies by that name? And in Italy, you get to hear them say things like, and tell me that this doesn't sound like the Tea Party and on up to MAGA. England and France are fighting for their privileges. We are fighting for our lives. So I really think that the representation of wokeism as a kind of pinky teacup, affectation, effete affectation, very Anglo. They're fighting for their privileges, their pronouns. That was the perfect example. That the pronouns thing was a perfect example of exactly the kind of thing they were criticizing in England. They were like, these empires with their special China and their fancy way of talking or whatever have nothing on us in the homeland, in the blood and soil world that we're in. And also somehow our lives are immediately threatened by this thing. So the idea of democracy as an affectation, the idea of, it's the aristocrats versus the people when you do left and right, the original right parliamentary thing that divides. So it's there's this aristocracy, they're sitting on their privileges. Well, right now, most, or I should say many of our privileges have been stripped away. I was susceptible in 2016 to the argument that the thing that I was most afraid of at the Women's March or whatever was having my privileges taken away. I mean, I remember going out and getting a latte in November right after the election, and there was a little swirl of a maple leaf or whatever it was on it, beautifully done. And I was like, how much is this a constituent part of my identity? How
the
important
avocado toast identity.
The avocado toast identity, or the whole if Kamala had won, we'd be at brunch right now, which a lot of people on the left don't like that kind of stuff. It's feminized, like you said, and the Chapo, whatever's become of the Chapo crowd, hates it. The right hates it. The real seething contempt for white women across the board is pretty interesting. And, the fact that 2 of the main murders of people on the left, Heather Heyer and now Renee Good, are of white women, I don't think is an accident. It's Tucker Carlson will say, I don't have anything against Black people. The people I hate, and he said this to the camera, the people I hate are white
The
women and
race traders.
race traders, race
Yeah.
traders. And also the people who, and I think Trump alludes to them too, kind of wine moms who give money, who are imagined to give a ton of money to armed radicals. It's sort of the radical chic problem, right? That there are like these rich, effete people who get off on how like sexy the Black Panthers are. Yeah, who authorize these kind of thugs to act on behalf of their fancy democracy. But like, whatever. Their fancy democracy is just another gang.
I
They
mean, I
call
think
it.
this does get back to like a lot of these narratives all kind of tie back to again that like, and we don't like, this is something that I find so fascinating, and I wrote about it recently, but like reading Laura K. Field's book Furious Minds recently, which was just
Yeah.
wonderful, and there are a number of other folks in that camp and that I cite in that article that I The Pleasures and Sorrows of Inequality, but is the idea that just because someone is really intelligent does not mean that they have the capability to handle discomfort and ambiguity.
Mhm.
That is something that is much more of a core temperamental trait and has to do with the functioning of your central nervous system.
Yes.
And so when we get to, and we don't acknowledge as a base part of our society, I don't think
Yeah.
there's any society that really does acknowledge that. But when we don't give people the capabilities to manage their emotional discomfort without externalizing it,
Mhm.
when we don't give people the capabilities to be introspective and to recognize when those emotions are overtaking them and to
Mhm.
say that I have this vulnerability and I need to manage it, and the responsibility to be self-contained,
Mhm.
then we get these whole movements and these whole stories, these narratives that will sort of validate and justify
Mhm.
that I don't need to manage myself. I don't need to manage my
Right.
discomfort
That's
because
right.
it's your fault
Yeah.
and you're the one who needs to go away so that
Yeah.
I can feel comfortable again because
Yes.
I'm on the right side. And
That's
all
right.
of those narratives are like these little fractalized versions of
Yeah.
defending that same core felt emotional truth of these folks.
Yes.
And
Yes.
all of the right-wing intellectuals fall into that camp. And all of the folks who just might, watch Fox News and have been listening to Rush Limbaugh or listen to Rush Limbaugh. Like it's the same thing. It's saying, don't worry, you're uncomfortable and you're right to be uncomfortable because all of this around you is wrong. And if it just changed and all of these people went away, you'd feel okay again.
So this is exactly why I have been I started now on Substack and TikTok, I think I want to get a piece of journal talk, the part of TikTok where people get like beautiful leather journals and pens. But
Right.
but I'm trying to do the sloppy, messed up version of that, which is just get any piece of paper that like use the back of an envelope and any ballpoint pen or pencil to write like Aris Origo did, because there are two reasons to not do this on social media, we say, as we're doing it on social media. But one of them is that the platforms are sold. Substack is largely owned by private equity that is aligned with a lot of bad things, but it's relatively free from at least the complete totalitarian control that you're starting to see on TikTok. It is crazy to see how quickly people shapeshift to try to use coded language so that they don't have their videos taken down. You've had this happen to you,
Mm-hmm.
or they don't get some messed up in the algorithm or whatever, because as most people know, the owner of TikTok is in whose hands it finally will one day be, or who knows, but is
Larry Ellison.
Larry Ellison, right, whose son owns CBS News. So you have, and they're all closely aligned with Trump. I won't even spell out the extent of their kind of brutal proto-fascist politics, but there they are. And then you have Zuckerberg and obviously of X and Truth Social. So the platforms are sold out. A piece of paper is probably the most secure platform you can find right now, the least sold out, the least ideological. But more importantly, and this is to your point about ambiguity, social media, including this, incentivizes certainty, short form communication that's about arguments, and the literary invention of our time, maybe the take. I'm not sure what a take was before social media, but a take is definitely like a quick perception, decisive, witty, and that does not admit of ambiguity. I mean, even if we said right now, I have no idea what's going to happen. That's just not something that you say in video, you say in public space. You try to give an interesting framework, you talk in polemics. Certainty is, I think, over incentivized. Reading Iris Orrigo's effort in her journal to try to plow through propaganda from all different sides and take it in to the body and be aware of, like, the radio is making a fool of me. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't even know, like, are all these people around the farm going to be called up? Also, they're all wearing these black shirts. They seem to be quite aligned with fascists. Do they have a point? Do they have a point? Is something wrong here? England is saying this, France is saying that. It's just giving me such a headache to listen to all this. And then occasionally, because it's a diary, some notes on what's really going on in her life. And what's really going on in her life is, like, she's doing an acrostic that predicts Stalin will win the war. All of the fascists that she listens to the radio with, because everyone in the country is a fascist with black shirts on, are, like, kind of laughing at Mussolini propaganda. So she's getting the high that I sometimes get, where it's like, the MAGA is over Trump, And so she goes home with that, cherishes it, that, like, even they are laughing now at, Il Duce, and, like, everybody knows he's posturing and it's going to be fine. But her willingness to, as I said in the TikTok, to start a diary entry by writing down the date and just saying, the atmosphere is very tense today. Right? It's like, you just don't start a TikTok with that. I don't put that on Blue Sky. Like, that doesn't win you points or circulation. But she's not thinking about reply guys, algorithms, any of that. It's just, let's just register the atmosphere is very tense today. And that's a useful thing. And it's a useful thing for history. And I really think that it's, like, I don't want to call it a small act of resistance, but it definitely is a way to be, you'll be free of the propaganda cacophony for just the time you're putting pen to paper. And
that
so,
is one of the things that, when we talk about, like, revisiting folks who have lived through times like this, because we say so often we're living in unprecedented times. That's not true.
That's right.
We are living in precedented times. We're just not living in the times that anyone ever wanted to live through again.
Yeah.
And the ones that we thought we never would, because that was what everybody said after World War II. They said, oh, this is so bad. This is so terrible. This is descending to the very depth of the human ability to be monstrous and atrocious.
Yeah.
This is the thing. We will never do this again. Lo and behold, here we are on the eve of another, the cusp of another.
And as I understand it, they also said that the war to end all wars was the war that preceded World War II.
That preceded World War II. Right. And so I think, like, we can look back. There are a lot of folks, and I'm going to do a piece on this, but who lived through these times and who came out with a lot of different tactics of what actually got them through. And one of those things is record keeping. And if we can do nothing else, we can keep a record. We can keep an accurate record of what went on. And that is even, something that other countries can help us do, because, they may not be able to come to our aid, but they can keep accurate records for us for referencing after the fact. But this is why we go back to people's diaries. Anne Frank, we go back to the one that you just read that I haven't read yet, Eric Fischel and Elie Wiesel. And, there's so many people who we read them because they are keeping an accurate record.
Yep. And it's also very interesting in thinking about the diary that I'm trying to keep right now, which used to be reserved for, like, notes on perfumes, something else you and I have in common, but has moved into, as I've done some handwriting repair program, like to, like, get my handwriting back a little bit, has moved into writing, trying to make notes on the present moment, forcing myself to write. Trump has declared himself the president of Venezuela. Does this have any meaning? That's it. That's all I write in there, right? But just thinking, I noticed that happened, and I am asking myself questions about it. I am in no position, no authority to do this, but I just don't want that moment to be missed. But anyway, the other thing is deciding. Iris Orrigo's 1940 part of her journal, it's called A Chill in the Air when it was published, is described as a war diary. Are we keeping war diaries? Are we at war? We don't know. When you're in the middle of it, when you're absolutely just punctual, you're just in medias res, you have no idea what's going on. You could tell yourself, as someone I heard recently said, I can't keep a diary. That's just for Anne Frank, But Anne Frank didn't know what she was in the middle of. And even Elie Wiesel and people in the camps didn't quite know what they were in the middle of, right? Like, are people in Seacoat keeping journals? Are they allowed to get pieces of paper, right? And their perception of what they're doing. I have a friend, believe it or not, who was taken captive by Al Qaeda years
Mm,
ago for fully 2 years. And
mm,
he describes what he wrote there because he was able to write short
mm.
stories and other things. He actually wrote porn for his captors. They wanted to hear stories of
Wow.
girls, you know?
Wow.
And so he wrote that, but he managed to like weave in some of his like hallucinations and anger and feelings,
Yeah.
right? And he calls it a prison diary
Mm,
because for 2 years he believed that he had been arrested for some transgression.
mhm,
When you're in the middle of it, you might just think, I'm not allowed to do this because what am I? I'm just like, I'm a wine mom and I'm pretending to be part of the French resistance. I'm not, right? But you don't know what you're part of right now. And that's why the diary's partial view, so that you don't have a view of what's going on in the world, is an honest way to represent life right now, as opposed to the incentive to dishonesty that we see on social media. So if people can use even a grain of their creative powers to put something down on the page, and I mean everyone. I mean, you want to know what Irisa Rigo was rich. She lived in the countryside. She didn't have a child. She just had a child die in childhood, but she didn't have a child going to war. She didn't really have a stake in it. She was the perfect person to say, like, person's irrelevant. Why should she write down in her diary, the Germans are within 50 miles of Paris? Right? We can get that from the newspapers, like when we look back and try to figure it out. But just thinking that they were 50 miles from, Brent, Paris. Like, is Paris burning? There was a moment where you were told on the radio that the Germans are coming to like sack Paris. Like, what a crazy frame of mind to be in, and that you don't know where things are leading. Like, I think that is being in uncertainty, the exact thing that you're describing. I mean, I didn't even think of that, but it's a wonderful antidote to wanting to be certain, to wanting to be righteous, to going to the gun range.
But again, that involves being able to accept ambiguity.
That's it. But the thing is, in a diary, you can't but accept ambiguity because, the last time I kept a diary, it was mostly like, is Paul going to call me? Will I ever lose weight? I was like 17. I think you're asking a lot of questions in a diary. It's a space that, ideally, because you're being honest, you're not reporting to other people, you're not trying to impress other people, you're not trying to get clicks. So it can be irrelevant, You can like make a shopping list. The other thing I've been thinking about a lot lately, and we probably should wrap up just for fairness to our listeners and viewers. Thank you all for tuning in. But what is teaching? Because I please everybody need to follow psyops on YouTube and
I'm
on.
not a psyop.
I know she's not a
Promise, I'm a
psyop.
real person.
That's it. But on YouTube and TikTok, because you do these like really beautiful. They're not polemics. They're like pedagogy. They're like, you really are walking people through complex subjects in a really generous way. Almost like if you'd had a tutor explain certain things to you. So if you all are wondering about AI or you're wondering about markets, like these are complicated things and you just do such a beautiful job. So, but I've been thinking
Thank
about
you.
teaching partly because The Pit is back on. And I think The Pit, the show, HBO show about an emergency room, is a lot about teaching.
Mm.
It's a teaching hospital. And so you see evidence of what does teaching look like. But I'm also thinking about it because there are people, to end on a somewhat up note, who are leaving MAGA, who are deconstructing their set of beliefs, who hit a wall when it came to seeing, bullet go into Renee Good's face, who said, if my best thinking led me here to support this thing, something is wrong with what I think. And I need to go back and question. And it's really interesting to see what deconstructing Christians question. But among those things, they're questioning hell. They're questioning, their race views. One of them said she went to work recently at Medieval Times, met gay people for the first time, and was suddenly like, what? Why did I hate you? Just simple as that. Right. And Medieval Times doing its magic. And those moments, I think, are really powerful, but also Some of them, one in particular, has been asking for a tutor because she has a homeschooled or a parochial religious school education, and she sees education and even debate the way Erica Kirk sees it, which is that it's an occasion for someone to convert you or for you to convert them. So
Proselytizing.
the
Yeah.
only reason that you get into a conversation with someone about their differing views is to make them one of yours. It's violence by another means. So it's not
Yeah.
conversion by the sword, it's conversion by like by the end, like Shylock, you will get
Spiritual
that.
warfare.
Spiritual warfare, exactly.
Yeah.
So you're like winning souls, you're getting scalps for the thing. And all dialogue that they promoted, even Charlie Kirk promoted, these debates that he did were debates where he was like seeking to save souls at a revival.
It was a St. George and the Dragon thing,
It
right?
was
It's
St. George
like,
and the Dragon.
I am taking my righteous sword and plunging it directly into your heart with my like incredible command of this argument.
That's it.
It's yeah.
That's it. So, like, when you see Barry Weiss and Erica Kirk sit down and talk about how important free debate is, they're talking about something completely different. Even Erica
Yeah.
Kirk says, I love all people. I love Jews. And all I ask is that they accept Jesus Christ into their hearts. The whole, like, I love Jews as long as they become Christians.
Yeah.
And
I mean, it gets back to that same, again, like, if only everyone were like me, if only no one made
Yes.
me feel uncomfortable,
That's it.
then we would all be able to sit down and
Right.
have and break bread together.
But one thing that seems really interesting to me is if, I think the way you and I and probably most of our listeners grew up who went to either public schools or secular schools of some kind and also maybe went to college, is that that's actually not what teaching looks like at all. No one is really trying to convert you. Like, you give robust and forceful accounts of what's going on in, say, markets or with the far right, but nothing in it has that feeling that like it's only complete when I acknowledge your dominance. But I sort of started to think that like these people, including these deconstructing Christians who were told that liberals are trying to indoctrinate you, where we are trying to adequately save your soul, right? So the only reason that you talk to someone is you're trying to dominate them or they're trying to dominate you, so that you could start to be like, well, a liberal institution like Harvard or like a public school is only trying to convert you to some other set of beliefs. But just our lived experience of teaching is not that. So anyway, this woman who's trying to deconstruct is reading secular books for the first time. And she's reading weird stuff. Like, she wants to read something on shame because she's immediately very ashamed of like what she used to believe. So she's, maybe Brene Brown, whatever. But she also was suddenly like, I think I hold all these leftist beliefs, but I don't really understand abortion. But then someone told me that like I'm against abortion, but that's okay because it's a moral thing, but it shouldn't be a legal thing. And like separation of powers, all these things are just totally new to her. The idea that like maybe morality shouldn't be legislated and that religious tolerance is somewhere in that like you have different practices than I do and I'm not going to make a law is really interesting. So she asked for a tutor. She wants to start reading secular books, but she has no idea where to start. And she said, I'm willing to compensate someone who would come in and teach me these things. And I was thinking, it's not even the texts that you might introduce her to, just the idea that if she says, I don't understand because I feel like abortion's wrong and liberals want to kill babies. And I agree with liberals in certain ways, but they want to kill all these babies. And if you said back to her, not, you're an idiot, but like, repent of your sins, you need feminist indoctrination. And you said instead, abortion is a thorny issue. It's incredibly interesting. We could start to talk about what personhood is, whatever, and just model what curiosity and education looks like. And maybe for the first time, say that the answer to a question is not just you're right or you're wrong, and you need to adopt my set of beliefs. Philosopher that I was talking to the other day was saying he came out of Mormonism because there's some passage that made it seem like the God of the Old Testament was quite punishing and like wanted people to kill their daughters, right? And just stumbling on a passage and then saying to his father, why does God do this? And having his father say, like, you cannot doubt the word of the angel Moroni or whatever, made him think, wait a second, I can't even.
This is actually why a lot of the folks in these camps, like that are a lot more restrictive in terms of the stories that they tell, hate relativism.
Yes,
Because
exactly.
if you can stand outside of something and critique it, then you can stop believing in it.
That's
And
it.
that's the true danger.
Right.
Right. And that's what
Right.
I mean. I think education, teaching is sort of imparting information in a way that gives people cognitive handles into something that they
Yeah.
can start to put together those narratives and pieces for themselves in a way that makes sense for them. And
Yeah.
it's ultimately rooted in compassion. And I think that's why, again, compassion is very ambiguous. Compassion is very nuanced. It's like, it's
Yes.
never straightforward. And in
Right.
order to be able to hold that, you have to be able to hold ambiguity and your own states of discomfort. Does it
Yes.
make me uncomfortable to encounter a lot of extremely intolerant people, some of which probably think that it would be better if I was dead? Yes, that's very uncomfortable.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
also, that's my discomfort. And I've got to be able to hold that if I'm going to be in genuine encounter with anything.
That's it. I mean, I'm hopelessly constitutionally optimistic. And one thing I think is that fascism as a system doesn't really have great survival skills. It's not very nimble. And there is a time I'm fascinated by how people come out of their religions, like these deconstructing Christians. I think there's a lot of intellectual energy there that people should pay attention to. But, one of them recently said that they knew that Utah was the Holy Land. And then at some point, they sort of saw a map of the world and just asked themselves, what are the chances that we're saved and no one in Paris is? And it was just looking at the map and just suddenly just saying, and that is elementary relativism. And it is
It's
very
just what a child does.
exactly.
It's
like
saying,
what?
why is that way? Why do
Yes.
you say that?
And what are
Wait
the
a minute.
chances
How
that
did it get this way?
Right. As compelling as it is for me to believe that I'm at the center of the universe and my brain is the only one that matters or even exists, it seems to be like given the lie by things around me. What are the chances that Il Duce knows everything, that Trump knows everything, and everyone else is nothing? The chances are zero. And the encounters you have with that, people online, like you talked about how they have too many fronts, too many theaters that they're fighting in. Even on TikTok. I mean, if I knew that I was posting to a place that was like run by an open propagandist who, is the biggest donor to the Friends of the IDF, whatever that organization is. There isn't even an organization, Friends of the US Army, but there's Friends of the IDF, and he gives to that, and he's close to Trump and whatever, and he runs the platform that I'm posting to. I would think you were crazy because I would picture it like Pravda in Russia. But the truth is, TikTok, it proliferates and it is a home of relativism par excellence because you have so many people. Like, if you ever want to think there's more things in heaven and earth than are dreamt of in your philosophy, dip into TikTok because you will see that like there is H-Mart gate. There are things that you can't even like. It is not just fascism versus democracy. There are like tiny things to do with, I mean, it's even impossible to get into all of it. Right now, there's like, is Dax Shepard and Cher's showdown say something about feminism? I mean, so if you need to think maybe what you are fixated on today is not the truth, the light, the way, then introduce yourself very simply to one of these other discourses and idioms, and you will remind yourself that other minds exist, other minds have ways of seeing the world, and that alone destabilizes your own thinking. Not even introduces you to new ways of thinking, but simply, like Socrates, gadflies you and makes you think, maybe I'm not taking dictation from God when I write things down. Maybe my view is partial. Maybe I have more
This
to
is
learn.
also why, restrictive thought systems will constrain art.
Yeah, that's it.
Because that's what art is for.
But don't you sort of believe that these forces, i.e. other minds, that one day that Mormon girl looks at a map and says, what are the chances that the hermetic ceiling of a fascist world order is kind of doesn't have the real survival skills to go that, Mussolini, the height of his power is like a few years from being hanged. It looks like 1,000-year Reich until it's snuffed out.
Well,
That fascist
it's impossible
regimes,
to hermetically seal anything at
right,
all in this world.
especially in the US. Like they can't even do it with CBS News. the leaks of the segments that have been killed are getting on 60 Minutes and CBS News are getting more attention than any episode of 60 Minutes that I can remember for the past 10 years. Even on the radio during Mussolini's regime, 1939, you could tune in to other stations. So like it is, and I can't speak to North Korea and I can't speak to China, right? So there are places where fascist regimes can exist, but like we haven't even talked about Iran, and I know we've got to go, but like you would just think, well, Iran, everyone must be just robots by now. Like they're just following orders, and then there's an uprising, or then there's Tiananmen Square, then there's Hong Kong, and weeds and flowers start like blooming in the cracks. And I just think it's very, very hard to keep democracy down. That's why it's a liberal democracy. It's a descriptive system. It's sort of how we already act. It's not a prescriptive system. It's sort of like Richard Rorty's very into wishy-washiness. He just says that a lot. Like, how do you solve the abortion conversation? Well, you say, like, life begins, well, maybe 6 weeks. I don't know. Let's just keep it to like, we'll just draw some arbitrary line. And the philosophers can hash it out over here. And, we need to be good to women, but we don't want to like kill a newborn baby. So let's make them, right? And so like this kind of ways that you solve problems in your family. You are child free by choice, which I applaud. But like even the decision you made to be child free has like a certain elegance to it, but it also isn't totally perfectly philosophically grounded, right? Like biology, you have to take tons of things into account. And when you're thinking of how your family's going to run, but if you have children before they're born, you think of like disciplinary systems, or at least you're going to always closely attune to them and sympathize with them in some lib way or whatever. In fact, it's just fucking improv all the time. You can't hold a perfect liberal regime. I definitely told my kids if they like ran out in front of the street that they were going to get arrested by the police and possibly for a capital offense, right? Like everyone becomes a fascist at some point and pulls in these things. But usually baggy liberal democracy with all its wishy-washiness, all its slow procedures, all its Congress, all its nonviolence, right? All its like solutions by using these processes that often slow down our avid impulses instead of give, exciting adrenaline to them. Those things manage to reassert themselves because they kind of are how we already act. Some of this stuff looks like arcane and, weird, but like democracies existed for a long time, and usually roughly the majority kind of gets its way, and
until it doesn't.
What's that? Until it
doesn't.
doesn't. For periods of time, it doesn't. But, Trump was elected by the majority, the hedged American majority. But yes, it seems more voters voted for him than for Kamala Harris. I haven't yet seen it proven that the election was stolen or that there was a lot of cheating there. And he's now way underwater with the American people, like direly underwater. I mean, we've never seen a president as loathed by the people outside of like Russia and Iraq or whatever. That is a very unstable system. No wonder he wants to knock on doors.
Pretty much anything that is a fascist mentality is eventually suicidal. And
that's it. Yes.
We see this over and over and over again. And that is the historicity of this bears it out, because ultimately, if you try to eliminate every source of discomfort, you are going to eventually come back to yourself, because that is where it actually lies.
Yes.
You are going to try to eliminate everything outside of yourself until there's nothing left. Then you eliminate yourself.
Right. Beautiful. I mean, I always think of this like line from Hamlet of like, I could lock myself in a walnut shell. I think that's it. And count myself the king of infinite space, or not that I had bad dreams. And you see Trump and Stephen Miller tormented by their bad dreams. They've like cut out everything except, and this is where Hitler ended. This is where Jeffrey Epstein ended. It's just like, I'm locked in a cell or a bunker or whatever. I finally sealed out everything. My eugenics project has succeeded. There's no one here except me with my weird delusions I have in my demented mind, if you're Trump. And
with my self-hatred,
my bad dreams. That's it. So, that's what we have to count on, that fascism is intrinsically suicidal, but we don't know, obviously, we don't know a timetable. And I think a really important thing for us to watch on our side is the body count, because we're in the period of harm reduction and we're in the period of we want to eliminate damage to bodies. And so I don't even know, one propaganda problem is we don't even know how many civilians were killed in Venezuela in that strike, right? I don't know anything
They're
about.
saying 80, but
They're saying 80. Okay, so like, who are those 80 people? You know, and then Decode, there have been some UN analyses of what's going on there. It's definitely torture. So, you know, we should keep our minds on that. Then all the detainees and kidnapped people that have been taken away from their loved ones, and like what's going on with them. We see videos of them being taken into cars, but where are they? Where are they all? Alligator Alcatraz also has had the UN report on it as a violent place of torture. So that is the kind of thing to keep our eyes on. There were a lot of bodies when George Bush was president, and that, I think, in many ways is the way you measure the damage of a president. So his undermining the dignity of the office or lying all the time, those things, that ship has sailed, right? That was the thing that we were warned about by critical race theory. Like, he raped people. We know he raped people, and we accepted that, right? But there are bodies to come. Anything we can do to get in the way of that kind of violence seems really important right now. And it does not require that you get a gun. Although I'm not blaming the Black Panthers for showing that they have guns and that they have the right to carry those guns, at least as an effort, a show of force, a show of strength, that the left is not unarmed. That said, it's the care to those bodies. It's the care of those people that need to be protected that we need to organize around, and we need to do this harm reduction.
I do think there are a lot of different actions that can be taken at a local level.
Mhm.
And, of course, mutual aid networks are extremely important. I think there's some technological solutions that we also need to start thinking about, which is like, what happens when the cell networks go down? We're seeing that with Iran. What happens when the internet is cut off? How do you communicate, et cetera? I mean, these are all things we can go into at another time. And I think this came from Tad Sturmer, who's a historian, the other night that I was watching, who said that, all transitions like this come with a body count.
Mhm.
There's never been a bloodless into fascism, unfortunately. And I do think it is time that we realize that I do think we've crossed a Rubicon. I think we are in a different place now as of the beginning of this year for a variety of reasons. And there is an inevitability to what is coming, I think. What that is, I'm hoping it's only a financial ruin, because that is still a really ripe area for us to have the rug pulled out from underneath us. It will also come with a body count. People will starve to death, but that is a possibility. That would be preferable over a civil war. But I do think we're in a place where we're going to watch what the evolution of this conflict actually turns out to produce.
Right. So, yes, we should probably leave it there, but I can't help but add that some kind of financial collapse like that, we're talking sort of Weimar, like no one can afford anything. There are queues, as the British economists call it. So there's breadlines. How does that actually lead to body counts? It is, as you say, it's through hunger, starvation, and hypo or hyperthermia. So people sleeping outside.
Exposure.
And that's where you feed and shelter the people who are suffering that way. The people
if there are people who can,
if there are people who can. So that's where we get to care. So those are the things I think to look to for the protection of other people's bodies, where that you are doing the right thing. Keep a journal, because that's also where you record these like simple apprehensions that Renee Good was shot in the face 3 times. Don't lose yourself in weird explanations that propagandists are telling you, because that will make you insane. Keep your sanity, right? You are instrumental in helping me keep my sanity, Sai. So in this time, because of the clarity that you bring to things. And we're really grateful that all of you tuned in.
Thanks, y'all. Appreciate it. Bye, Virginia.
Bye.
Losses to the neck, but now I'm trophied up. I'm saying like, bing, bop, boom, 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 bop, bam.